So yeah, I was about to introduce myself, but that was a much better introduction than I give myself. Hector at the mill. The stuff that I'll talk about today is not just my personal work, but the mill's work as a whole. I've worked at the mill for almost a decade, so really my work is so entwined with the mill's work. I'll be speaking about their work and other teams' work as much as my own. And what I really want to talk about is sort of the past 5 years, how we've seen this change in media and the media landscape that we work in. The mill has been around for almost 30 years and traditionally done visual effects work. Started in film. It was the first company to win an Oscar out of British visual effects companies for the Gladiator. Then got more heavily involved in commercials, and as it expanded out into New York and LA, we were really focusing on commercials, and then we started to see all kinds of other media platforms spring up. And so I just want to talk about how my career has changed and how that mirrors the kind of change in media that the mill has made, and flow through all that. And as I talk through this, by all means, interrupt me, ask me as many questions as possible. It makes it much easier for me to talk for a longer time rather than just listen to myself talk. So as I talk through this, having looked at the other talks that people have come and given at this lecture series, all the media that I'll be showing you is much more commercially minded. And I think that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's nice to do experimental work, but it's really commercial work that pays the bills and allows us to be employed. And so I often think about that as I talk through work, like what are we trying to give to our client? Like, what's important to our clients? Like, how do they access a bigger market? And to me, it's opened up huge possibilities in my career. It's what's allowed me to travel the world, do fun things, like when I'm being a visual effects supervisor, flying around in helicopters, filming cities. Went to Dubai and got to go to the top of the Burj Khalifa, like the very, very top where you hang off the side in a harness. Just came back from Shanghai. So all this commercial media is what allows those fun things, and allows us to make fun stuff. So that's the kind of content I'll be showing you today. So the title of the talk, Evolution Media, it's hard to put a title on it. This is a really rough diagram that I just threw together, but I think it gets the point across of not that long ago, there wasn't a huge amount of media outlets. There was sort of TV, the internet. Yes, there was cinema and a lot of other things I haven't put on here. But really rapidly, there was an escalation where we went from sort of traditional media, and that's how you consumed everything. You waited for your broadcast TV, and then all of a sudden we're in a phase where you select what you watch. You ever think of going back to the way we used to watch TV now that we have Netflix or YouTube or all the media that you have on your phone. And I think that trend, what it's pushing towards, is a deeper experience. People expect a deeper experience. They're not satisfied to just be bombarded by standard content. What they're looking for is something that they can interact with. And so that's what we're trying to give. We can't rely on our legacy at the mill of having made great commercials. Now we need to think about making a commercial of quality that attracts people to go and see it. Like a lot of even the traditional 16:9 commercials that we make live or die by their success on something like YouTube. So it's not about the fact that it's going to get broadcast and people automatically watch it. We need to make a 2.5-minute film that is exciting enough that people seek it out and go and watch it. And I think that's interesting for all kinds of new media, that you have to cut through the noise. There's so much noise out there in the media space. You have to think about how you're going to make a quality of experience that people will seek out. They'll bother to download it, play with it, interact with it, and experiment with it. And if you're not doing that, if you're not giving someone a new experience, chances are it's just going to be caught up in the noise. So I think a big part of this expansion of media platforms and new technology, a lot of people think that it makes it easier as a creative to come up with ideas, but in my mind it's actually more of a challenge. But it comes back to us as creative thinkers and creative technologists to push ourselves to a higher level, to make sure that we're creating something that will cut through that noise and penetrate the social media platforms and echo out into the world in a meaningful way. again, to me, that always comes back to experience. Like, how are you giving people a deeper experience? And my view of where that's at is the phone is a big part of that. That is sort of the lightweight experience, but it's the constant experience that people are happening. They're constantly interacting with their phones, and that will take them then to what we're starting to see now, which is bigger and deeper experiences, stadium scale experiences, where it's huge screens. It's what's the next evolution of cinema. You look at the amount of hours people are willing to dedicate to a TV program like Game of Thrones. They're looking for that really deep dive. They'll start at a really superficial level, and then they're looking to get to that really deep dive. And I think these points are interesting as we try and create new content. It's just keeping these things in the back of our mind of what kind of landscape we're in, what is this kind of media that we're making, and how does it work within that landscape. So that's what I'm going to try and cover, is sort of how we went from smaller scale media all the way up to this sort of multifaceted media, and what's my experience in that. The start of that, for me, and for the mill, is the visual effects work we've always done. The mill's been doing it for almost 3 decades, I've been doing it for almost 2 decades. When you consider also my background in university, I actually started out as a digital map painter, which is relatively far away from the technology spectrum, but you still had to learn a lot about, like, I had to learn at the early stages how to write NURB splines and NURBS calculations and do basic C++ programming just to get by, because it's what was required. And that foundation is what has allowed me to then transition into new technology in a really interesting way, because I think it's those building blocks of technology that we use in VFX that has led to a lot of the technology we're now seeing, such as AR, and the fact that it's essentially dependent on tracking. Tracking is the fundamental of any visual effects shots. You need to take that camera shot, that camera plate, pass it through tracking software, and that's what allows you to cement a digital object into that real world. And now it's really just that tracking has become so optimized that it allows us to do that in real time, and then you have AR. So I'm going to show you our VFX reel just to show you that background that we have.
That you think no one's heard of what happened here.
so wealth of technology, but then really in the past 5 years, I've seen a huge explosion in the kinds of media that we create, and that has also flowed back into how we make visual effects. So about 5 years ago is when I started to really look at VR. That was sort of the jump into new technology for me. There was a huge explosion. And I think that was sort of the critical mass point where the landscape really changed, because there was so much hype about that media, and the fact that that media is not just a reformatted version of a traditional piece of media. There's no way of taking a standard piece of media and turning it into a VR piece. You can't reformat, it just doesn't work. That forced us to change and think about different ways, and that created this explosion. And it was at the same time that game engines were getting to a point where we could really use them for VFX and create high quality work. And it was the same point where our clients started to want physical installations. They just didn't want stuff that just lived online or lived on TV. They actually wanted big physical structures. And so there was this sudden shift in the landscape. And that echoed beyond just the work that we were making. It was also how we related to our clients. The fact that if you're not broadcasting media, it doesn't tend to go through the same agency process. It tends to be more of a direct relationship to the end client. So if we're working with Coca-Cola or Nike, and we're talking about an experience that lives within one of their Nike's premier stores, then it's a really direct connection with the client there, and the way that we work with them, and we're collaborating with them in a much deeper way. So it's a really interesting change, both in the work that we create and the landscape of the work and the style of work. And so I just want to play you our experience reel that sort of shows that shift from the VFX work that we're known for through into this new age of media.
It's cold outside, and the paint's spilling off of my walls. There's a man outside, in a long coat grey hat, smoking a cigarette. But the friend's electric, only mine's broke down. And now I'm no one too loud. The friend's electric.
Experiences we're putting out into the world. There's that big shift of people want interactivity, they want responsive, they want contextual media. And so now I'm just going to jump back to rewind to how I sort of got involved in this. The start for me was, as I was saying, virtual reality. The first big project we did was with Google called Help. But even before that, the way that I sort of edged into this area was that understanding of cameras and projections. Understand like cameras and lenses and formatting and how they relate to a digital environment. So very on before sort of Oculus headsets were out there in the world, way before they were bought by Facebook, we were looking at a project between Ford and Oculus. How can we make a car feel like it's driving around you? We started playing around, like I started experimenting with cameras. It was literally like one of the mill R&D guys that started writing some of the first video players for the Oculus headset. Before the Rift was out, this was just like prototype days when Oculus was working out of the garage. Seeing how we could play video, can we make a 360 video that you were looking around inside of? Can you make a stereo 360 video? And it certainly wasn't us that invented stereo 360 work, but it was just an interesting time where I would be taking cameras at home, 4 cameras, digital SLRs, taking stills, figuring out like how can I merge these and still keep the stereo offset. So it literally felt like you were inventing stuff from scratch, which was a really fun time. And then from that, Blvd, who are a media company that worked with Justin Lin, Todd McElroth, who's one of their producers, knew us from these tests that we were doing for Ford, and brought us into this project with Google. And the idea behind this was to create a cinematic experience that was better on your phone than on a big cinema screen. The idea wasn't actually to make VR content, because this was before headsets were out. It was really that headsets came out whilst we were making the project. Really, it was actually just designed to be on your phone, that you could look around. It was a piece of tech that came from Motorola, and when Google bought Motorola, a guy called Rashid had figured out you could play a 360 video and then look around inside it with your phone using the IMU. And so the idea behind this was how far could we push a cinematic experience that was better on your mobile phone. And through that process of making it, we realized actually that works really well on a headset, on something like the Oculus or the Gear VR. And that's how we got into that whole idea. I'm going to play the behind the scenes of this just because it explains a lot more than I can explain.
The spotlight stories are a fantastic new way of telling narratives, and one of the really exciting parts of that is it forces the viewer to be interactive. They have to find their own narrative through a story. The clear obvious challenge we saw from the start of this project was the fact that there's no camera rig that filmed the complete 360-degree view of the world at a cinema quality. So that pushed us towards fisheye lenses that allowed us to capture large portions of our 360 degrees with as few cameras as possible.
Just looking at what lenses are being used, these ones are very special. There's 4 of them, they're all going to be slightly different, and we needed a perfect calibration of those lenses. We ended up writing some software that measures these lenses incredibly precisely, so much so that not only does it remove the distortion, but we get rid of the chromatic aberration and things like that as well.
It will help sharpen the images to get the most precise tracking out of the 4 cameras.
One of the key on-set tools that we developed was what we call Mill Stitch.
Mill Stitch is quite an impressive hardware-software solution that allows you to stitch these incoming sources in real time, and it allows the filmmaker the ability to essentially look at the piece and interactive control a window inside of the 360 environment and emulates what the experience would be like at the end format. What we did build into the system was a recording system. We'd record the live stitch. We also record the user input. This automation of the user input married with the live stitch, we can then supply to the edit house, which uses that for offline selects, which speeds things up.
We went in the direction of creating primarily CG environments, which meant that the stitches between the different points of view of the different cameras could be blended more seamlessly.
If you hold your finger up, blink one eye, blink the other eye, the finger will move. Same thing happens when you have multiple cameras trying to film the same thing, meaning you will see an object from multiple directions because you will move around it. And you have to take parts that you can't see from one camera that need to be patched up from a different camera.
As we moved into a more full CG approach to the environments, we had a huge amount of control. We could manipulate the environment, and that we had more freedom for the director so that he could move the camera where he wanted, when he wanted, without constantly considering implications in post.
Project this big, anything that's not correct in your pipeline becomes very visible, and we've now fixed all these things, so we now have an amazing, stable platform to work on.
This project, even if it was considered just a traditional shot, I think would be a huge visual effects challenge. When you start to look at all the events that are happening, from the huge sweeping camera moves, the continuous aspect of the shot, and the scale of the effects that are happening. Our asset count and the fidelity of our assets sort of went through the roof.
One of the biggest problems we had was just getting our head around the numbers.
We ended up with well over 100 cars, multiple blocks of buildings being laid out, all the way out to the far horizon line of the LA City skyline. And this is also, beyond us, one of the biggest VR projects undertaken.
Some of the innovations that we've done should actually translate and help us with other VR work as we move forward, especially the mobile review that allows us to review this 360 work on mobile devices.
Virtual reality is a whole new world, and through this project, the mill has really positioned itself at the very frontier of an expanding technology.
We gotta go! We gotta go! Run! Run! Run!
That was actually quite a while ago we did that. Years ago. It still stands as sort of this, probably one of the most ambitious 360 films made. And as we're sort of explaining in that video, like all the bits that needed to come together to make that were really interesting and sort of showed us new ways of working, like the onset real-time stitch, that was using Touch Designer, doing a lot of stuff in Touch Designer that it didn't do at the time, so we actually had to collaborate with the guys who made that, get them in, talk to them about, like, look, we need to be able to manipulate images in different ways. And that tool set now exists within Touch Designer. The same goes for our compositing pipeline in Nuke, Cara VR, which is sort of their standard toolkit for VR now. Didn't exist then. We wrote a bunch of tools. That's what the guys at the Foundry then picked up and incorporated and sort of based a lot of Cara VR tools on. And that's what's really exciting about a project like that, is that level of pushing the boundaries and understanding what can we do, how can we make all our tool set throughout our entire pipeline stronger, more robust, down to things like the simulations, like the big monster smashing the bridge at the end of that, done in Houdini simulation, but because there's no cuts and it's a 360, it's not like the camera ever tracks off that, so that sim needs to run until it resolves, like all the smoke needs to dissipate, everything needs to stop moving, and that lasts for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whereas a standard shot in a film lasts 3 seconds, 4 seconds. So you have to run a sim that you can't divide, you can't split that on a render farm. It has to run on a single computer, and it has to run for like 4 or 5 days to calculate just the rigid bodies, and then you go back and use the rigid bodies to calculate the smoke on top of it. So just sort of that escalation, and that forced us to rethink our asset system, literally the cabling in the walls of the building, and that's what I find so interesting about these kind of projects, is it pushes us to do new kind of work that our facility is not geared for, and we have to improve because of it. From that, we saw this sort of explosion of a lot more VR. So I started to do things like directing the music video that was mentioned, Reaps One, working with a lot of other production companies to do things like promotional VR 360 films. And at the same time, game engine was starting to pick up more, so we did experimental pieces like Strata, with this little picture of like a purple digital landscape that Rama in our New York office, one of our executive creative directors, was experimenting with a meditative VR experience, which you put on a bunch bunch of biometric sensors, and the more you calm down, the more you elevate through different layers of meditative environment, through to 6x9, which is built-in game engine but runs on a Gear VR, and it's a virtual experience that is a sort of piece about what it is to be in solitary confinement, and it was impactful enough that it made it all the way to being shown at the White House in the previous administration, and had a genuine impact on policy about who gets sent off solitary confinement and how that works. So it was really interesting, that huge explosion that we saw of VR and how it shifted everything, and we started creating different kinds of media. We started to use new technology, and it really changed a lot of the way that we viewed work. All those learnings, like I was saying about what we learned on the HELP project, then flowed back into our general production pipeline, so our asset systems and how we view technology. And one of the things we were developing at the same time as I was finishing that project was a car that we call the Blackbird. We do a huge amount of car commercials, and you'd be amazed at how hard it is to get a new car to a set to film a car commercial when that car hasn't been released. And so a lot of the time you end up with previous year's car, or the wrong color, or the wrong model, and then we have to augment that car in post and change it. And then also, that car model is different for different markets around the world. So here in America, a lot of trim is chrome. In Europe, it tends to be body color. And we tend to do all that in post. We'll adjust little bits. And we've done that so much, we started to think that there must be a much better way of doing this. And so we actually built a physical car called the Blackbird that is an electrical modular car, and it can imitate wheelbase and the driving characteristics of pretty much any car. And then it's loaded with sensor information. So it essentially works like motion capture, but for cars. So you still go out and you still film the Blackbird, and you put the right wheels on it for the car that you're emulating, and you film it like you would a traditional car commercial, but then it captures all the information so that we can replace that car really accurately in post. And the camera rig that we mounted on top of that is the same camera rig that I developed for the HELP project, that captures really high quality 360 capture of the world in high dynamic range, and that provides the reflections that go onto our digital car. So if it drives under trees, the dappled lightning ripples across the car in the correct way. So we're starting to see that interplay between like all these new medias evolving, that's filtering back into our production pipeline, and we're generating new products that come from it. The next evolution of that was a project called The Human Race, where we thought, what can we do to push the Blackbird to the next level? So we spoke with Epic Games and looked at, could we actually make a commercial that directly ran out of Unreal Engine? So I'm going to play a little behind the scenes of what we did with those guys. run through some of the interesting stuff in that project. So what we did with the actual filming, the on-set aspect, is use actual AR overlay of the digital car live on set, which is a lot harder than it sounds, because we're driving 60 miles an hour down a road. There's no way of transmitting tracking data. It's literally a track from the filming camera that we're using. So we mount a camera on a crane, hang it off of something like a Porsche Cayenne normally. That's our pursuit vehicle that's chasing the Blackbird. The software needs to track through the lens of that hero camera, stitch that footage together using the same mill stitch stuff that we developed for Help, and then take that and use that as a HDRI that shows the reflections on the digital car, and then pipes that through to the camera operators. So as they're looking through the viewfinders and the director's sitting in that car going 60 miles an hour down the road, he's seeing a real-time image of the car with the correct reflections written over it. So those are proxy renders, but still good enough to understand, like, great, if we swing the camera this way, we'll see the sun kick off the top of the car. And so we want to align our shot that way, or we want to get close and see the headlines straight through the camera. And then we took all that data and put that into Unreal, got it to that point where it's now photorealistic, but it's still directly running out of Unreal. So the way we run that commercial, if we do a live demo of it, is it's actually rendering out in real time, and then you can select what color you want the car, what trim you want the car, and it updates the commercial in real time because it's actually being rendered out of the game engine in real time. So you start to see all these different technologies come together and push what we can do. If that on-set version of AR is sort of the big industrial version of AR before it's getting out onto your phone and other platforms, I just want to go through like what we see as consumer AR and the levels of that, everything from phone up to head-mounted displays. So at the lightest level, we see stuff like Facebook filters and Instagram filters built in Spark AR, and this has actually become an important market for us. We do a huge amount of work for them. A lot of the features go back into Facebook. We work with them to collaborate and figure out how far we can push this. I would definitely encourage you guys to go and play with that as a platform. In some ways it seems trivial. There's a lot of other deeper platforms like Google's AR Core, where you can get and encode a bunch of stuff. But the beauty of Spark AR is it's super easy to use. It has amazing tool sets like it's pupil tracking, it's recognizing hand gestures. Their new features will actually do scene separation and understand a background behind you, trapped in the world. It can build up an understanding of the lighting environment. So you can do really interesting things with it, and it's mass market. You don't need to download anything. If you have Instagram or Facebook on your phone, you already have it there. There's no barrier to entry for a consumer. If you put a QR code or an image that triggers it out there in the world on a movie poster, someone can hold up their phone, it will instantly recognize it and explode a 3D world out there. So that's really interesting to our clients. We're not asking them to invest in their own platform. It's literally there, it's ready for the taking, there's no download time. So I have a little clip of the kind of stuff that we've created with this. Those kind of filters for different clients now. So it's a great, easy way of getting out tons of content. People love to play with it. It gets a lot of traction, and you can do really fun things with it. A lot of the stuff that we're doing is more sort of commercially orientated, but I see some amazing experiments out there on the communities of people who play play with this stuff. The next level for me would be a custom AR app, something that you download. The advantages of that is obviously you can manipulate and make something much more powerful. This project, Welcome to Marwen AR app, was to go along with the launch of Welcome to Marwen the film. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who loved to play with new technology. That was, he loves motion capture. That's a big part of the film. That this man is having this fantasy world and playing with miniature characters. And so it made a lot of sense to show that in AR, take a scene from the film and allow people to look around in that. There's no way of doing that in a lightweight format like Spark AR. It needs its own downloadable app. I can't remember exactly what this was. It's like 300 megabytes. So you do have that barrier to entry, like you're asking people to actually download something and use up space on their phone and commit to using it. The payoff is we get to do 8 characters with full skeletal system. Still a lot of optimization to get film assets onto a phone, but it means we can do a lot more. So this is that sort of intro. Sure, if you guys have played around with developing for mobile, you've bounced off a lot of the barriers that we found with this, particularly with a client. The client wants to hit as many people as possible, so they want it to be accessible by as many smartphones as possible, but at the same time they want the best quality, which is was the latest iPhone. So you're balancing those restraints of what do we do? Do we make it look awesome and sort of restrict ourselves to only people who have the most expensive phones? Or do we have to make it wider and allow a lot more people to use it? And then you start to balance out where are we distributing processing resources? Is it on the AR tracking? Is it on the rendering? Always seems so simple from the outset of well, we'll just use AR core, we'll use the basic plane tracker. Then of course you lay down a scene and you look up to see the top of a building and you've lost your plane and now you have to switch over to IMU. So I'm sure as you guys play with stuff in AR, you're looking at that, what is that data stream and that balance of switching streams and sort of sensor fusion to get the most stable tracking. The kind of application that you're building for will really dictate that kind of tracking and what your goal is. The more you take over the world, the easier it is actually. So VR is actually a very easy thing compared to AR to get that stable tracking that cements worlds together. So stepping forward from that, obviously the next level up is head-mounted displays. They provide the deepest experience, but is, again, a much more limited market. You can view that as going in the different directions of Spark AR is the widest market, the most accessible, but is the shallowest experience, through to head-mounted displays, which is the deepest experience, but the most limited market. So we have clients who are still really interested in this. You think about all the automotive work that we do. It makes a lot of sense for automotive design groups to use the Magic Leap, these kind of headsets to walk around a car, see what that future design is, explode it out. One of the projects we worked with Magic Leap on was Tanandi, where we worked as sort of creative and technical support to their internal team. I have a little clip of what that was. It's nice to see that experimental use and the fact that they play with those kind of technologies in a creative way. And then after that, we've gone on to explore things like object permanence, things like if I'm using my headset at home to put a 75-inch display TV on my wall, and I put it up and I find the perfect position, and then I turn it off, I go to bed, I come back the next day, will it still be there? And amazingly, it is, literally within like a fraction of an inch. So you start to see like other uses for these tools. We've played around with what is it like to take a headset to set. So when we're designing a set, we will put on a headset, we can look at a set and design that, and we can figure out like where the interaction point between a digital takeover of our set is in comparison to the physical build. So there's a lot of uses, both as an end display to the public, but also uses within our VFX pipeline of how we can play with this kind of stuff. I mean, to me, I always find AI headsets amazing. Like, yes, they still have issues with field of view and so on, but when I think about the layers of tech that have had to be stacked on top of each other to get to that point where you can put on a headset and hold up your hand and it knows it's your hand and you can do a gesture and it understands and it reacts within the world, I still find really amazing. And looking at like the APIs to interact with that, there's literally like, call that hand gesture, and it will send me a command I find really amazing. So playing with those tool sets and mixing that with the understanding of images and graphics that we have from our history of VFX, I find really exciting. Events for us is sort of the next big thing that I think is really taking off. So as I was saying at the start, that going from those mobile experiences, stuff like a AR filter on your phone that ties in and says, hey, come and have a deeper experience at a store like this. Middle image is something we recently rolled out at Nike's Premier store in New York. So interactive experiences that deal with like the launch of products and stuff like that is becoming really important, really key. And they go much more beyond just the people who happen to be there, like they echo out in social media. So I want to step through a few different examples of the kind of deeper experiences we're making. Location-based VR, you know, a lot of VR has sort of slipped to the side slightly, but location-based VR is a really good use of VR in my mind. It allows us to do things that we can't do with home digestible VR, where we've had to strip it down to be something that plays on a lesser headset. We can do full backpacks, we can have walkthrough experiences. This Corona experience was exactly that. And it was tied into a bigger installation. So it was a party in Mexico City that we set up for Corona, where as you entered the party, you got a token. Throughout somewhere point in the evening, a sort of themed actor amongst everyone in the party would come and tap you on the shoulder. They were themed as sort of a hummingbird outfit. They would tell you you can use your token now to put it into the Corona vending machine. You step into the vending machine. That's where you onboard into VR. You walk through a VR environment where you follow a hummingbird through that environment. And that drops you off in a sort of secret after party thing. So we're using VR and digital layers to expand what we can build out as a physical experience, and then you start to get really interesting stuff. Obviously, I have a little clip. From the commercial perspective, what's really interesting for a client is the fact that it echoes out and it gets that social media traction, and it gets a lot more views than the several hundred people that we actually put through the VR experience. Although putting several hundred slightly tipsy people through an experience is actually really hard. And the tricks that we sort of played around with to do that are really interesting. It was 4 backpack headsets, if I remember correctly, and the design is that people are walking in a circle, so you can have several people, so you're onboarding one person, you're sending them off, onboarding the next person and switching around, and that way you can actually get that throughput. And it's just really interesting to me, this shift from, we only used to deal with digital assets. It was kind of these digital files we'd send off, and now we're taking over big physical spaces and making big physical installations that are tactile and interactive. And we have to think about user experience from not just traditional UX UI interface, but literally like how are they physically interacting. And we do this to a degree, like we do Comic-Con experiences through a group that is part of the mill called Campfire that specialize in experiential installations. And we've gotten to the point where some of those installations are 100% physical. There's no digital element. We did one for The Purge, the TV series, where we set up a store that was Purge themed. It's called Purge City, intentionally playing on Party City to the point where the intention was to get sued by Party City, and they did. They came after us with a lawsuit intentionally. And we're actually getting to that point where we're doing these physical stunts, and that store had, I can't remember, something like 20,000 products in it, all branded and sort of stylized in the Purge ethos. So you had a candle that burned for the length of the Purge. You had stain remover to get the blood out, and we detailed all of those physical props down to the fine print of them being released from the government agency that exists within the Purge universe. So this is really interesting to me, the fact that we can then blend that with something like VR, and we can use tech to expand those universes and build out universes beyond what we can physically create. I did a really interesting project in collaboration with a company called Spatial Land, which is Walmart's internal VR group, working with DreamWorks to build a How to Train Your Dragons ride that was rolled out across the US at different Walmart stores. And what was so nice about that was it gave a sort of theme park quality ride. You put on a headset, you got into a positron chair, and it sort of is like a roller coaster ride through the hidden world. And there's no way we could do that previously. Like we had queues around the block of kids wanting to go on this ride. We took it to SIGGRAPH earlier this year. It was the only thing at SIGGRAPH that had a queue of people waiting to use it. And so you start to think about flipping things on their head that traditionally these were experiences only available in massive theme parks, huge multi-million-dollar builds, and now we can literally roll it out on a truck in a chair and give that same experience to people. So I think location-based VR is still an interesting use of VR. Location-based AR, how can we take that big heavy duty? I think I'll jump straight into the example because it's very self-explanatory. That was one of the launch pieces for EA's game Anthem, EA Play, and it worked off picking up the camera feeds, tracking them live, and then rendering through Unreal Engine that digital overlay of the creatures emerging at the screen and fighting. When you start to think about other ways of using AR at events, you think about scavenger hunts. How can you get people to interact or push them around in an event space and do interesting things? So I think, again, like location-based VR, location AR just allows you to mix physical and digital environments in a really interesting way. And where that's pushing is that deeper level of fan engagement. I think one of the best examples we've done so far of that is this Nike Mercurial launch installation, where at the launch of the Mercurial cleat trainer, we set up this digital event where a bunch of social media influencers were invited, and they got to interact with this digital time trial. And then from that, because it's digitally laid out, that they run through and hit these key points, and we had, as you can see in the corner of this image, guys with steady cams. Those cue points are lined up to work with digital edit points that we have, so we could mix overlays of interesting effects with the film that we're getting. We put that into a semi-automated edit. We start to refine by hand to get those points, because people will run at a different speed, hit different points, and then give back to all the people that went through it a really personalized, essentially their own Nike commercial, where they become the star of their Nike commercial.
Fala galera, estou aqui em Londres para o lançamento de vários produtos e inovações incríveis da Nike Futebol. Até a nova Mercurial. Fica ligado!
As that end statistic was saying, 120 edits, so essentially 120 commercials built in 2 days during the event, and I think we put that together event in about 4 weeks. So traditionally, to make one commercial takes several months, and now we're spitting out 120 customized commercials for individuals who come to that event that proliferate out into social media in a matter of weeks, and those edits are being cooked out in literally hours. So again, it's just that interesting shift from a much slower process, and how can we speed that up? A big part of speeding all that up is obviously real time, and by real time I don't just mean just standard game engine. It's that whole concept of GPU versus CPU. The fact that even our standard offline rendering in Arnold is now GPU accelerated. The fact that we can use AI running on TensorFlow cores to help simulations or help denoise grain in renders. All of this is just speeding up the way that we work. So sort of one of the last sections I want to go through is just how we're seeing that shift now based off the game engine. One of the things we've played around with is trying to speed up animation. So from, rather than just keyframing, and also not just using a motion capture stage, but what's something that we can play with at our desks, or puppeteer essentially. And we came up with Mill Mascot. Team out of New York came up with using the leap motion as a hand sensor that allow you to puppeteer things and then essentially perform characters.
HPE needed a way to bring their CG IT monster to life so it could play with audiences at the Discover conference in Las Vegas. Impossible? Nah. We've got Mill Mascot. Using a super cool custom setup with sensors and gesture control, the Mill's real-time character animation system combines futuristic tech with the centuries-old tradition of puppeteering, meaning CG characters aren't animated, they're performed live. In no time, IT Monster was packing his bags for Sin City. We performed 3 real-time experiences to engage with the audience. At the Mimic Wall, visitors could joke, play, and dance with the IT Monster. Take Control gives visitors the ability to grab the reins and puppeteer the monster themselves. Easy peasy. Put that monster in check. During Rick Lewis's keynote, IT Monster, not used to being out of the spotlight, crashed Rick's party live. And this is all possible because Mill Mascot is human-powered. He thinks, interacts, and improvises intelligently because he is intelligent. Mill Mascot offers a new way for brands to engage their audience. It creates a real-time relationship of relevance, empowerment, and humanity. It's more than a cool piece of tech. It's an invitation to play.
So it's actually, in some ways, quite simple, but super effective. And now we're adding things like using a phone to capture face tracking at the same time. So it's doing your face tracking. You can then puppeteer the character's arms whilst it's tracking the face. And it's really a sliding scale from the next project I'll show you is our full sort of motion capture system. But now we have something that we can plug into a desktop and perform stuff that then goes into commercial or do those interactive installations at different events. The opposite end of the spectrum, new methods for creating still traditional media, so still a rendered out film, but how can we use game engine to make more interesting content? Kashmir Cat was for a DJ by that name, Kashmir Cat. He wanted a series of music videos featuring this character that he wanted to create. It's really hard to make that amount of content really quickly. We've spit out 2 music videos for him now, and the way that we did it was on our motion capture stage, set up the environment, brought in the director, and allowed him to film it using virtual production tools. And that means we essentially get the final film built there in real time, and then it's really just for us to take and polish the quality of it for the final render out. But we can do it in a really interactive way. It's really interesting from a directorial standpoint to be able to do that, to see those virtual characters. So as you can just see, this is what we're filming live on stage. So the director has steady cam, and he's following around the dancer, and what he filmed, he's seeing directly on the viewfinder and on a big screen behind her. As well as being done in real time with the game, so that was visible as the director was doing that as well. So we're sort of trying to pull as much of what we're doing post over into the game engine and see that live. So what the director is seeing whilst he's recording that motion capture on stage is as close to the final product as possible. And it just leads to more interesting creative opportunities. That traditionally you would do the motion capture set up. You wouldn't really see a huge amount of what you're going to get in the final VFX post-pipeline. You have to transfer all that data over, refine the animation, render stuff out on the render farm overnight, bring that back, and then you start to get a sense of what you've actually filmed. And here we're literally like, what you film right there on the day is what you're going to get. We're just going to polish it slightly to make those transitions between the different setups that we can fit onto our motion capture stage. So what that leads towards is, what are the new ideas? Like, great, we've got all this tech, but it comes back to what I was saying at the start of how we're going to use it to make something interesting that cuts through, that sort of echoes out into the world. So it's more onus on us as creative technologists and creatives to come up with interesting ideas. So sort of coming full circle from the music video that I did with Reaps One, I forget how many years ago now, that was a demonstration of ambisonic sound and how that was being implemented on the YouTube platform. That was sort of the first ambisonic implementation on YouTube, and they used the music video that I did with Reaps One, who's a world-renowned beatboxer, as their demonstration piece that they took to festivals and Cannes Lions. But then from that relationship with Reaps, he's continued to collaborate with the Mill. He's done a bunch of projects, again, with our creative Rama from our New York office, playing with other ways of doing stuff. So these are much more experimental pieces where we're just trying to see what we can do. One of them is C-Sound, where, because he has such good control of his voice, he's literally MRI'd himself whilst he's been beatboxing to see how his vocal cords are working, because he can produce multiple sounds at the same time whilst he's beatboxing, which isn't meant to be possible. So he MRI'd himself and looked at like what his part's doing. Because he can control his voice so well, we built him a visualizer, an artistic visualizer of allowing him to use his voice to make three-dimensional sculptures. And then we also played around with creating an AI that would beatbox battle with him. So it's not just emulating the beats that he makes. We trained it, got it to understand what music and rhythm and beats is, then gave it a vocabulary of his voice samples, and then allowed it to respond to him. So this is the kind of stuff that we're now playing with, is what's next. Like, how can we bring all these different interesting aspects of tech and do really interesting collaborations? So I'll go through those two different projects.
Faces before they come. Pledge shores are rattling as they run. Here to grow up, I am blunt. Move.
Artistic collaboration is left to a partner.
Something that has its own creative value.
Using its own intelligence, its own insight, and its own inspirations.
So the question is, can we collaborate with an AI?
So we naturally thought a beatbox battle could help us test this. We created an AI to collaborate with a vocalist, Reaps One, resulting in a beatbox intelligence that improvises in a real-time duet and in a call and response battle of man versus machine.
We decided to use a convolutional neural network to listen to him. It understands his voice and what sounds and beats he's making. So we used machine learning to train it in music, feeding it hip-hop, R&B, and funk to know what beats are and how to improvise and compose music that would work with the beats that the artist is making.
And then it performs. It uses a vocal sample bank built from Reaps' voice. And it does it all in real time. And the AI creates improvisational fuel for an artist, and the duet together creates something totally new.
I have an other that is an extension of me. The interactions are some of the best moments I've had as an artist.
The future is really only limited by our imagination.
I don't know how much you guys have played around with AI. To me, I think the most interesting thing about AI is it makes those tasks that you'd have to be such an expert programmer and coder way more accessible. Like writing a piece of software that could improvise beatbox and music would take so long, and now we can take that out and allow the AI to plug that hole in of setting up those dynamic things. And we've tried this on design projects. We've looked at what would it be if you taught an AI the aesthetic qualities of what proportions are interesting and bombard it with different design works and then let it figure out its own interpretation of design and aesthetic layouts. Stuff that would just take way too long to program manually. So I find that really fascinating, and the same fact that it's helping us with tool sets, like it's getting into the point of how can we take motion capture and then clean it up using AI, because there's subtleties between blending between a walk cycle and a run cycle of a digital character that is missing when you just do it using traditional methods. But an AI, if it's been taught to understand the balance and the mechanics of the human body, can flow and interpolate those things. And again, to code that, to just sit down and figure that out yourself is never going to happen. But an AI allows us to plug in those holes. So I really see it as an interesting tool, and using it in these artistic ways is really interesting. So what's next for me? What am I working on at the moment? Interestingly, I'm working with Blvd Wolf, who is an artist, very different aesthetic, but a similar background to Reaps. Reaps, who also works under the name Harry Zeff, has done a residency at Nokia's Bell Laboratories. Blvd also done that previously. And these kind of artists who mix between music and technology, he's done projects like sending her record out into space, or looking at how can she weave fabric out of a song that she's made. So really curious combinations. What I'm working on with her right now is she wanted to do an environmental visualization piece looking at CO2 in the atmosphere. And so we looked at a statistical set of data that she found that catalogs CO2 emissions from 800,000 years ago to present day. And we're looking at interesting ways of visualizing that. And then we came up with the metaphor of cloth. We're playing with how can we weave in images, how can that cloth take on the statistical shape and structure of all this data that we have. And the next step is to take that and make it interactive and build it out as an art installation so that people can come push against that cloth and play with it and force people to engage with it so that they want to learn more about the cause. And I think that's the interesting thing about these engaging installations is it forces people to play with it. They're going to get more interested in it, and so they're going to find out more about the subject that you're trying to discuss or elevate. So this at the moment is just a little trailer that we've created.
Outside the people like cars are still running, when inside it's safe to deny that it's coming. The TV's turned up so the winds are just humming to the sound of the heat rising. We don't want to hear that the problem is us, so we live like we want in our own universe. 'Cause man thinks he's God in a devilish way. We're too proud to see what we won't even say. We don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. So take my hand, babe, and I'll walk you to school, where you'll learn how to live by a new set of rules. 'Cause we played all our cards, there's none left for you. Forgive us, my dear, can't you see? It's the truth that we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. Turn back.
Yeah, this is really how at the mill we're trying to push what we do internally. Take on something like this, which is a more artistic, internal project, and then see what technology we can use to make it interesting from the tech side that marries with sort of the artistic notion of it. So the simulation, the cloth weaving, we're building that in Houdini, but then still keeping that live as we're translating all that data over into Unreal. So that's what's going to allow us to make it more interactive. We still have that bank of statistics and data that we can keep running in the background that provides a sort of solid structure of the cloth. But then because it's live and active, you can still push on it, change it. We're weaving images into the cloth. There's sort of a few gaps in this cloth that you can't really see, but we've developed a system that allows us to imprint different images into the weave of the cloth, so we can layer in that kind of information. The lighting of the cloth, whilst this is just a render out, because it's coming out of game engine, we can allow the lighting that's around the screen to affect it. We can use the same kind of tech that we used all the way back in those car renders of capturing light information. We could attach a camera to the screen and allow the digital art space to merge with the real space of the gallery. So this isn't just a pre-rendered piece of content, it means that we can merge it into any gallery that we take it to. So it's live and active and sits within that space. If we take it to a gallery here in LA that has bright sunlight pouring in a window, we can make that pick up in our digital scene so it feels like it's interactive. If we find that the statistics in the data set that we're using evolve next year and we see another spike in CO2, as we probably will, we can incorporate that and make the artistic piece live longer. So these are the kind of things we're playing with. This piece still isn't finished. It probably won't be finished until sometime next year, but that's kind of where we're at. So that's everything from about 5 years of starting with VR through to this really weird landscape that we see at the moment of AI and interactivity and game engine and all these things layering on top of each other to create weird and wonderful art installations. So thank you very much for having me, and any questions about all this stuff?
I know we're almost on time, but please, if you have any questions.
It's easy.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
It looks like, first of all, incredible work. It's super inspiring, especially for this class. I did want to ask, and I'm kind of interested in the tools and apps that you're building. Are they being developed? Like when you start a project, do you know already you're going to develop that tool, or the clients approach you now already because they don't have the ability, or has that evolved?
It's a big mix. So there's internal tools that we're developing to support, say, projects where the tool is behind the scenes, so stuff like Blackbird car. The idea is that you don't see that in the final media, it's obviously covered up. That's an internal tool, so we know what we're developing behind the scenes. When we approach a client about a creative installation or activation that they want, we try to go in with a neutral mindset of understanding what it is that they want to promote and how they want to promote it, and then if that needs a particular tech, then we'll marry it to that technology as we're discussing what the creative goal is. So try not to go in with like, okay, we're going to make you an AR app. Now what do you want that AR app to do? Tell us what you want in your store, and then we'll figure out whether AR is the right solution to do that. And then we'll figure out what kind of AR that is. Do we want an app that you can send out into the world? Is it something that you just want in the store or functioning on tablets? So it's a mix, if that answers your question. Yes.
So given like where you guys started originally, just VFX, the original media categories, do you feel like everything's expanding quite rapidly, and at a certain point it'll be really hard to manage the amount of technology and innovation that comes out of everything you're kind of touching on? Because it started from VFX, and now you're ending up with AI and virtual reality and interactive installations and stuff like that.
No, that's a really good question and point. It was stuff I had in some of my notes, but realized I was running out of time with it. Of where are we at in that cycle? It's not like we're at that, I don't know if you're aware of that concept of like technology singularity and that point of like hitting that expansion and explosion. I don't think we're really there yet. So it is becoming harder and harder to be an expert in all these fields. And I think the way that I approach it personally is sort of going from project to project. I don't think that I could stay abreast of like every single technology that's out there, but as I see a new project pop up and what it demands, then I go and research all the solutions that would work for that project and try and figure that out and piece together the tech for that. I think we're fortunate at the mill that we've got so many people thinking about it. We're managing to sort of keep pace. But I think a critical part of that is keeping open-minded and looking what other people are doing. I think it's easy to become arrogant and say, we're the mill, we're a big company, we're at the cutting edge of everything. We're never going to be able to do that. And so it's important for us to continue to look, and it might be that person at home in their bedroom that comes up with a really clever idea and keeping switched on to what's happening out in the world and keep an eye on that stuff and jump on that. Recently I was out in Shanghai to film the launch of the new League of Legends and Riot software because they've hit their 10-year anniversary. And whilst we were out there, like that just blew my mind of like the scale of what they're doing and the scale of like what's going on in Shanghai, like the fact that these massive skyscrapers are completely LED impregnated, and they're doing exactly what you saw in Blade Runner films, of these huge graphics that spiral up buildings, and then a company like Riot is just taking over these vast stadiums and doing huge scale. So I think that's where things are heading. What technology that's going to use, I have no idea, but that's kind of the fun of it, figure it out.
Cool. Thank you.
So first, thank you for your talk. It's super inspiring, super cool. Everything that you've been talking about aligns really closely to what we do in this program.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure a lot of the students really like everything they saw. I have a lot of questions, but since we don't have time, I'm just gonna first. I thought it was really interesting in the Blackbird project. There's a moment that it says the future of film. That's when people will be able to choose their characters, choose the cars. So I was wondering, what is your take on that? Do you feel that film is also going to change from the traditional, storytelling to a non-linear maybe timeline? Yeah. And then on the other side, I'll just slip another question. So we also work a lot with real-time engines, real-time rendering. It's our main focus. We use a lot of touch designer in this program. But for example, for real-time engine, gaming engine, we use Unity mainly. Yep. You've been talking about Unreal a lot. I was wondering if the mill uses Unity as well, or and if it's just Unreal based. If you could tell us a little bit about what.
We use both, so we're sort of platform agnostic. We have a really strong relationship with both Unreal and Unity, and it really comes down to what we're doing. So the Marwin AR app that was built in Unity, because Unity does a lot better, or it's easier to develop in a way that is distributable to mobile platforms for that kind of stuff. Then Unreal, we've also got to know it a lot better, so it's easier for us to do much higher quality graphics at the moment in Unreal. So it really just depends what we're trying to do with it. We also do use Touch Designer a bunch, so all these kind of things, and we also string them together. So like what we're doing on the Blackbird project, the stitch of the images, I'm not sure if the final version was, but there was a point where we were bringing those images, stitching them in Touch Designer and kicking Touch Designer bakeout stream into Unreal and using that to map on. So we'll kind of tie things together. It's kind of whatever fits the bill. It's like what's in the tool chest, and we'll kind of string that together. And if I remember your other question correctly, of like what is that next generation of cinema? I'm a big fan of cinema, so I don't think traditional cinema, like I think this was something that was misunderstood about VR. Like everyone's going to go home and put on a headset and want to interact all the time. It's kind of exhausting. A lot of the time, you just want to go home and put on the TV and just watch and just be entertained. And I think that side of cinema is there. I think what could change that more is those bigger, newer venues. Like it's something that we're looking at a huge amount. I've spent time on big building sites with a hard hat on this year, looking at these massive new venues that are being created, and I think people gravitate towards those of like, what's that next level of experience? And I think that I haven't seen yet. Cinema screens have kind of gotten a little bit bigger, and they've gotten 3D, and that's kind of it. But there's a lot of stuff out there that's about to break, where it's like, what is the next immersive version of cinema, or what blends between a stage performance and immersive experience. So I don't know whether that will change and make interactive storytelling. I think there will be some of that. I don't know if you've been to stuff like the Sleep No More performances in New York that started out as Punch Drunk Theatre in London. I saw them as Punch Drunk Theatre in London, where it's not a traditional play, it's a play where you wander around a building and you're immersed discussed by actors. That stuff to me is amazing. And that's the kind of stuff we were trying to edge into with stuff like Corona. So I see that taking off, like people really want that. We see that, say, when we speak to the big games companies, a lot of that audience just wants a deeper and deeper immersion into the game and being part of it. So you can start to see those worlds colliding. So I think there's different parts. There's the passive entertainment, where people just want to relax and be entertained. I think what we'll see there is just an explosion onto massive formats and theatres and kind of stuff that you really couldn't have imagined until you see it. And then there'll be that deeper immersion where people want to go and interact, walk around a real environment and take some of that media or content or IP that they love, see it sort of exploded out into a full world.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.